comparatively few things that she'd found the envelope with the money. In one of their last conversations in the hospital, Gran had made her promise to go to Ireland, Maura to say a mass in the old church in Lepp where she'd been married. "Say my farewells for me, darling," she'd said, and Maura had agreed to her face, although she had thought it was no more than the ramblings of a sick old woman. How was she supposed to fly to Ireland when she wasn't sure she could make the next rent payment? The envelope, tucked in the back of Gran's battered dresser alongside Maura's passport, held the answer. It had contained just enough cash to buy a plane ticket from Boston to Dublin, and to pay for a short stay if Maura was frugal. Since Gran had taught her well, she didn't think she'd have any trouble doing that. How Gran had managed to set aside that much, Maura would never know. She'd buried Gran with only a few of her Irish immigrant friends in attendance, and a week later she'd found herself on a plane. And here she was. Maura was surprised to feel the sting of tears. She was cold, damp, jet-lagged, and, if she was honest with herself, depressed. It had been a long few weeks, but at least staying busy had allowed her to keep her sadness at bay. Gran had been her only relative, her only tie to any place. And with Gran gone, Maura was no longer sure where she belonged. She was free, if broke. She could go anywhere she wanted, and with her work experience tending bar and waitressing, she could pick up a short-term job almost anywhere. The problem was, she didn't know where she wanted to go. There was nothing to hold her in Boston, but there was no point in leaving either. Maura looked out through rain streaming down the windows. She'd always heard that Ireland was green, but at the moment all she could see was grey. What had Gran wanted her to find in Ireland? Since Gran had never really mentioned any people back home to Maura, she'd been surprised to find a bundle of letters and photographs stashed next to the envelope with the money, where Gran must have been sure that Maura would find them. Sorting through them after Gran's death, she had found that the few photographs were ones she had seen no more than once or twice in her life. But luckily, Gran had written names on the back. Most of the letters had come from a Bridget Nolan, with only the skimpiest of return addresses, not even a street listing. Taking a chance, and wanting to believe that someone in Ireland would care, Maura had written to the woman about her old friend Nora's death, and her wish that Maura make the trip to Ireland to pay her respects there. Mrs. Nolan had written back immediately and urged her to come over. Her spidery handwriting hinted at her advanced age and suggested that Maura shouldn't delay. And it was barely 2 weeks later that Maura had found herself on the plane, and then on a bus, which passed through small towns, cheerfully painted in bright colors, as if to fight the gloom of the rain. Most often it took no more than a couple of minutes to go from one end of the town to the other, and between there was a lot of open land, dotted with cattle and sheep, and the occasional ruined castle to remind Maura that she was definitely somewhere that wasn't Boston. The towns listed on the road signs meant nothing to her. She was afraid of dozing off and missing her stop. Mrs. Nolan had given Maura sketchy instructions to get off the bus in front of Sullivan's pub in a village called Lepp, and they would see to her, whatever that meant. The bus lurched and belched fumes as it rumbled along the main highway on the south coast, though highway was a rather grand description. It was 2 lanes wide. More than once the bus had found itself behind a truck, lumbering along at a brisk 20 miles per hour, but nobody had seemed anxious about it. No one was hurrying. Finally, through the murk of the late March afternoon, Maura could make out a large painted sign by the road, Sullivan's of Lepp, with a dashing highwayman riding a horse straight out of the sign. It was no more than a minute later that the bus driver called out, "Lepp," which he pronounced Lep as in leper, and Maura gathered her belongings, which consisted of a battered duffel bag with her clothes, plus an old-school backpack with everything else, and waited while a few other women climbed down. The women appeared to be regular riders. They exchanged farewells and vanished quickly in different directions, leaving Maura standing alone in the rain, looking at the dilapidated facade of Sullivan's. Despite the rain, she took a moment to study the town and get her bearings. Actually, town was probably not the right term, since she could see most of it from where she stood on the main road.